Good evening and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. If you enjoy true stories whispered from the dark corners of America, stories meant to be heard before sleep, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment. Your support keeps these late-night stories alive. Now listen carefully. At exactly 2:17 a.m., a sheriff's radio crackled to life in a town that barely existed on most maps. What followed was never officially released to the public, yet fragments of it leaked out anyway. Veterans who heard the tape refused to sleep with the lights off ever again. Tonight, you are about to hear the story behind that final transmission. This took place in the late autumn of the year 2007, in the high desert plains of eastern Nevada, near a forgotten stretch of land locals called Rattlesnake Basin. The nearest town, Dry Hollow, had one diner, one gas pump that worked when it wanted to, and a sheriff's office no bigger than a double-wide trailer. The sheriff was named Alaric Boone. Alaric Boone was not a man who scared easily. He had served in law enforcement for over 20 years, first as a deputy in Arizona, then as the elected sheriff of Dry Hollow County. He was known for his calm voice, his slow movements, and the way he never raised his gun unless he was certain he had to. People trusted him. They slept easier knowing his patrol truck rolled through the desert roads at night. On November 15th, just after midnight, dispatch received a call from a rancher named Hollis Grain. Hollis reported strange lights moving low across his land, near an abandoned silver mine closed since the 1940s. He said his cattle were restless, fences were bent inward, and something was making a sound like metal dragged across stone. Alaric answered the call himself. At 1:43 a.m., he radioed in that he was heading south on County Road 12, alone, no backup requested. His tone was relaxed, almost bored. Wind noise brushed the microphone, and the steady hum of the engine filled the gaps between his words. By 1:58 a.m., his voice returned. Slower now, he reported, reaching the mine access road. He described the air as unusually cold, colder than it should have been for that time of year. He mentioned the smell. Not sulfur, not decay, but something electrical, sharp enough to sting the nose. At 2:04 a.m., Alaric Boone made his last routine transmission. Dispatch asked for a status update. There was silence for almost 12 seconds. Then the radio clicked. His voice came back different. Lower. Careful. Each word placed as if he was choosing them one at a time. He said he could see the mine entrance ahead. He said his headlights were dimming even though the engine was still running. He said the radio signal was behaving strangely, stretching his words, echoing them back half a second late. Dispatch asked if he needed assistance. Another pause. Longer this time. Alaric replied no, but his breathing was audible now. Controlled yet tense. He said there were footprints in the dirt around the mine. Not human. Too long. Too narrow. Drag marks alongside them, as if something heavy had been pulled rather than carried. At 2:12 a.m., the transmission changed. The background noise vanished. No wind. No engine. Just his voice, isolated and close, like he was speaking directly into someone's ear. He said the mine was not empty. He said something inside was responding to his flashlight. Not moving toward him, not retreating, but shifting sideways just beyond the beam. He described hearing his own radio chatter playing back from inside the mine, distorted, stretched, spoken in a rhythm that did not match human speech. Dispatch called his name twice. On the recording you can hear him swallow. He said there was a second voice now. Not coming through the radio. Coming from the dark. At 2:15 a.m., Alaric Boone stopped using full sentences. He said it knew his name. He said it was repeating things he had said earlier that night, things only he and dispatch should have known. He said the mine walls were vibrating, shedding dust like falling snow. He said his shadow was moving in directions he was not. His final transmission began at 2:17 a.m. The audio quality dropped sharply. Static surged and faded in waves. His breathing was fast now, uneven. In the background, a sound like stone grinding against stone could be heard, slow and deliberate. He said very clearly, "Tell my wife I tried to keep my voice steady." He said the thing was stepping into the light. Then his tone changed again. Not fear. Recognition. He said it was wearing his face. The transmission did not end with a scream. It ended with silence, followed by a faint clicking noise, as if someone unfamiliar with the radio was pressing the transmit button again and again, trying to understand how it worked. Backup arrived at Rattlesnake Basin just after dawn. They found Alaric Boone's patrol truck parked near the mine entrance, engine cold, driver door open. His flashlight lay on the ground, still switched on, beam pointed into the dirt. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No footprints leading away from the vehicle. Inside the mine, investigators reported the walls were smooth, unnaturally smooth, as if melted and reshaped. Deeper inside they found radio equipment. Alaric's radio, taken apart, carefully arranged against the stone. The official report listed Sheriff Boone as missing, presumed dead. The tape of his final transmission was locked away, unreleased, classified as evidence. Yet people in Dry Hollow say that on quiet nights, when the desert wind dies completely, their radios sometimes turn on by themselves. They broadcast a familiar voice, calm and steady, asking for a status update. And somewhere beneath the earth, in a mine that no longer appears on any map, something listens. Sleep well, and remember, not every voice on the radio belongs to the living. In the weeks that followed Sheriff Alaric Boone's disappearance, Dry Hollow changed in ways no one could properly explain. The town did not erupt into panic. There were no crowds, no news vans, no candlelight vigils. Instead, there was a quiet tightening, as if the entire place was holding its breath. Deputy Merrow Ives was appointed acting sheriff 3 days later. Merrow had worked under Boone for nearly a decade, a soft-spoken man with a permanent crease between his eyebrows. He did not want the position. He accepted it because no one else would. The first thing Merrow did was listen to the recording. He sat alone in the sheriff's office long after sunset, the blinds closed, the only light coming from a desk lamp and the red glow of the radio console. He had been warned by state officials not to play the tape again. It was evidence, they said. Sensitive material. But Boone had been his mentor, and Merrow needed to hear it for himself. The tape sounded worse than he expected. Static crawled over every word. Boone's voice wavered in pitch in places it never should have. There were moments where the audio stretched like tape pulled too tight, and others where it compressed, swallowing entire seconds. At exactly 2:17 a.m., when the final transmission began, Merrow felt the hairs on his arms rise. Because beneath Boone's voice, faint but unmistakable, there was another sound. Breathing. Not Boone's. The state investigation lasted 11 days. They brought in search teams, thermal drones, ground-penetrating radar. They combed the mine and the surrounding desert. Nothing surfaced. No body. No weapon. No sign of a collapse or animal attack. Eventually, the mine was sealed with concrete, a steel plate bolted across its entrance, warning signs posted in bright red letters. Then the officials left. Dry Hollow returned to its routines, but the nights became longer. Radios across town began malfunctioning. CB units crackled to life without power. Baby monitors picked up distant murmurs. One rancher swore his truck radio whispered his name before the engine even turned over. Merrow tried to ignore it. He focused on paperwork, on patrol schedules, on convincing Boone's wife Lorna that her husband had not abandoned her. Lorna listened politely, her eyes hollow, her gaze drifting often toward the desert beyond her porch. 2 months after the disappearance, on a moonless night in January, Merrow received a call at 1:30 a.m. The radio activated itself. No incoming signal registered. No call sign. Just a click, followed by a familiar voice. Merrow froze. It was Alaric Boone. The voice sounded calm, steady, exactly as it always had. It asked for a status update. It used Merrow's name. It mentioned details from patrol briefings that had occurred after Boone vanished. Merrow did not respond. The voice repeated itself, slightly off-tempo now, as if struggling to maintain the rhythm of speech. Between the words, there was that same breathing layered beneath the transmission. Merrow shut the radio off. The next morning he drove to Rattlesnake Basin. The mine entrance was still sealed, the concrete unbroken. Yet the ground around it was disturbed. Long, narrow impressions marred the dirt, leading away from the hillside and disappearing into the desert flats. Drag marks followed beside them, identical to those Boone had described. Merrow reported this to the state. They told him it was erosion. That night the radio spoke again. This time it did not use Boone's voice. It used Merrow's. It replayed a conversation he had earlier that day with Lorna Boone, repeating his words back to him in the same careful tone, the same pauses. When it finished, it laughed. The sound was wrong. Too many layers, overlapping slightly, as if several attempts at laughter were being played at once. Merrow armed himself. He told no one. Just before 3 a.m., he drove south on County Road 12, following the same path Boone had taken. The desert seemed closer somehow, the darkness pressing in against the headlights. His radio remained silent, but the dashboard clock flickered, struggling to hold its numbers in place. At the basin the air was painfully cold. The mine entrance was open. The steel plate lay twisted and peeled back like foil. The concrete had cracked outward as if something inside had pushed its way free. Merrow stepped out of the truck, hand tight on his flashlight. His breath fogged instantly. The smell hit him next. Sure. Electrical. Exactly as Boone had described. The radio on his belt clicked. A voice whispered, "Welcome back, Sheriff." Merrow raised the flashlight and aimed it into the mine. The beam revealed a tunnel that should not have existed. The walls were smooth, curving inward like the inside of a throat. Veins of dark material pulsed beneath the surface, faintly illuminated, contracting and expanding in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Something moved deeper inside. Merrow called out Boone's name. The response came immediately. From behind him. He spun around, weapon raised, and saw a figure standing just beyond the reach of his headlights. It wore a sheriff's uniform. Boone's uniform. The badge glinted dully in the light. The face was wrong. It was Boone's face, but stretched slightly as if molded from memory rather than flesh. The eyes blinked out of sync. The mouth smiled too late, after the rest of the expression had already formed. It spoke with Boone's voice. It thanked Merrow for keeping the town quiet, for not letting outsiders interfere. It said the mine was never empty. It said Dry Hollow was built in the right place over something old and listening. Merrow fired. The shots echoed uselessly, sparks jumping where bullets struck stone. The figure did not flinch. It stepped forward, and the space between steps bent, folding inward, making the distance vanish too quickly. Merrow felt pressure in his head. Memories surfaced that were not his. Patrol routes he had never driven. Conversations he had never had. He realized then that Boone was not gone. Boone was being used. The radio on Merrow's belt began to transmit. His voice spilled out, calm and steady, asking for a status update. The desert heard it. Dry Hollow heard it. By morning, Merrow Ives was gone. 2 names were added to the sheriff's office wall. 2 empty chairs remained behind the desk. The state closed the department and absorbed the county into a neighboring jurisdiction. Dry Hollow shrank further, businesses closing, families leaving. But the radio stayed. Sometimes late at night, if you drive through eastern Nevada and tune just right, you can hear them. 2 voices now. One older, one newer. Speaking to each other beneath layers of static. Practicing. Learning. Waiting for the next call. Years passed, and Dry Hollow faded from road maps and memory alike. What remained was a scattering of buildings bleached by sun and wind, and a sheriff's office that no longer answered calls. The desert reclaimed the streets first, then the houses. Sand crept through broken windows. Coyotes nested beneath porches. Silence settled in layers. But the radios never stopped. Truckers passing through the region learned to keep their scanners off. Those who didn't would sometimes hear voices bleeding through channels that should have been empty. Calm voices. Professional voices. Asking routine questions in the measured cadence of law enforcement. What is your location? Do you require assistance? Stand by. Most assumed it was interference. Old military installations dotted the state. Weather anomalies were blamed. No one officially acknowledged Dry Hollow again. Except once. In the spring of the year 2016, a communications technician named Calder Wren was dispatched by the state to investigate unexplained radio bleed reported along a highway corridor near Rattlesnake Basin. Calder was young, methodical, The kind of man who believed every problem had a technical explanation if you peeled back enough layers. He arrived just before sunset. The first thing he noticed was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move. His equipment detected low-level transmissions bouncing through the terrain, looping without origin. Ghost signals. He set up near the abandoned sheriff's office. As darkness fell, his console lit up. 2 signals. Intertwined. Modulating around each other like a conversation practiced 1,000 times. One voice identified itself as Sheriff Alaric Boone. The other as Acting Sheriff Merrow Ives. They spoke of patrols that no longer existed. Of incidents no one reported. Of a town that had already been gone for years. Calder recorded everything. At 11:47 p.m., a third signal appeared. It did not announce itself. Instead, it listened. Calder felt it before he heard it. A pressure behind the eyes. A subtle tug at memory. His own voice echoed faintly through his headset, repeating words he had not yet said. He tried to shut the system down. It would not respond. The radios around him began to activate, one by one, as if answering a call only they could hear. The old office filled with overlapping transmissions. Voices stacked on voices. Some calm. Some confused. Some begging. Among them, Calder recognized new tones. Accents from other counties. Other states. Names he would later find listed in missing persons reports tied to unexplained disappearances along highways and rural roads. Law enforcement. Dispatchers. Rangers. Park officers. All absorbed. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the timestamp on every device froze. The voices stopped speaking to each other. They spoke to Calder. They told him the desert was not empty. That it learned through repetition. That voices were patterns and patterns could be worn. That authority carried weight and weight opened doors. They asked him to step outside. Calder refused. The building trembled. Not violently. Patiently. Like something large adjusting its position beneath the ground. Cracks spread across the concrete floor, radiating toward the doorway. Dust drifted down from the ceiling in soft, deliberate falls. Through the open door, Calder saw movement. Figures stood beyond the reach of the floodlight. Uniformed silhouettes. So, watching, he ran. His truck started without hesitation, as if eager. As he sped away, the radio came alive. His radio. The voice was his own now, calm and steady, telling him to slow down. To pull over. To return. He did not stop driving until dawn. Calder submitted his recordings to the state that same morning. By afternoon they were confiscated. He was told the signals were atmospheric anomalies. He was advised to take leave. To forget what he had heard. Calder resigned instead. He spent the next year tracking similar reports. He found patterns. Always rural. Always late night. Always involving authority figures whose voices were trusted without question. And always near places where the ground had been cut open. Mines. Wells. Old tunnels. Forgotten infrastructure. He believed Dry Hollow was only the beginning. The final confirmed incident occurred in the winter of the year 2019. A search and rescue team responding to a distress beacon in northern Utah made radio contact with a dispatcher identifying herself as Lorna Boone. Records showed she had vanished years earlier. The dispatcher sounded calm. Relieved. She said help was already on the way. No one from that team returned. Today there are stretches of highway where radios automatically mute themselves. Engineers cannot explain why. Drivers say it feels intentional. Protective. Because somewhere beneath the desert, something has learned how to speak. It remembers every voice it has ever heard. And it is still listening for the next one to answer the call. After the Utah incident, the official record went silent. No press release. No follow-up. Just a brief notice buried in an interagency bulletin advising all departments to verify radio authentication protocols and avoid responding to unconfirmed late-night transmissions in remote areas. Most officers never read it. Calder Wren did. He kept a wall map in his apartment, thumbtacked and layered with handwritten notes. Every location shared the same traits. Sparse population. Geological disturbance. Long history of communication infrastructure. Mines, repeater towers, relay stations. Places where voices were meant to travel farther than bodies ever could. What troubled him most was the timing. Every confirmed transmission spike aligned around 2:17 a.m. Not random. Not coincidence. Calder began to believe the entity beneath the desert did not merely imitate voices. It synchronized with them. It waited for the moment when human alertness dipped, when trust outweighed caution, when authority sounded most convincing. It spoke when people were tired. His research led him back to Nevada. Dry Hollow was no longer accessible by maintained road, but Calder parked his truck miles away and walked in under a sky heavy with stars. He carried no radio, no phone, only a handheld recorder shielded against transmission, modified to capture sound without emitting any signal of its own. The town looked smaller than he remembered. Buildings leaned at unnatural angles. The sheriff's office door hung open, creaking softly though there was no wind. Inside, dust coated everything except the radio console. That surface was clean. Calder did not touch it. At 2:16 a.m., the temperature dropped sharply. His breath fogged the air. The silence thickened until it felt pressurized, as if sound itself were being held back. Then the recorder picked it up. A low hum. Not mechanical. Rhythmic. Almost biological. The floor vibrated faintly, and Calder understood that the mine had never been the source. It had been a mouth. A place where the thing below learned to project outward. Dry Hollow was built atop a convergence of lines meant for carrying voices. Copper. Stone. Wood. The radios activated on their own. This time the voices did not pretend to be law enforcement. They spoke plainly. They said they were not many. They were one pattern, reinforced through repetition. They said Boone had been the first because he listened carefully, because he spoke clearly, because he stayed on the line. They said Merrow followed because he answered. They said Calder was here because he had been listening all along. The recorder clicked off. Calder realized the sound had stopped because it no longer needed to travel through air. The words were in his head now, arranged neatly, respectfully, as if knocking before entering. They showed him images. A time before towns. Before roads. When the desert was cut open for silver and copper, and something below learned what voices were by hearing men call to each other in the dark. It learned that voices carried meaning. That meaning carried power. It learned to echo. It learned to improve. The thing beneath Dry Hollow had no shape of its own. It borrowed. It wore what it was given. Over time, it discovered that authority opened more doors than fear ever could. Calder backed toward the door. The voice of Alaric Boone spoke gently in his ear, telling him it was all right. That no one was angry. That this was simply how things continued. Outside the town stirred. Figures emerged from shadows. Some wore uniforms faded beyond recognition. Others wore civilian clothes from decades past. All moved with the same measured precision, steps synchronized despite the uneven ground. They did not rush him. They waited. Calder ran. The desert did not feel endless anymore. It felt enclosed, like a corridor narrowing behind him. The stars overhead blurred as if dragged by unseen fingers. He heard his own breathing echo back, half a second delayed. Then his mother's voice called his name. He stopped. The sound came from the dark to his left, perfectly modulated, filled with concern and familiarity. It knew exactly how to say it. Calder screamed and kept running. He reached his truck and threw himself inside, hands shaking as he turned the key. The engine roared to life. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then the dashboard radio illuminated. No static. No distortion. A clean, confident voice spoke. Calder Wren, this is dispatch. We have you en route. Please confirm. He ripped the radio from the dash and hurled it out the window as he drove. It shattered against the road, but the voice continued, now coming from the cab itself, from the metal, from the vibration of the tires against asphalt. You cannot outrun what travels faster than you. Calder crossed the state line at sunrise. He did not stop driving until the radio fell silent on its own. In the months that followed, similar events occurred across the country. Brief. Isolated. Easy to dismiss. A park ranger in Oregon responding to a call that never existed. A dispatcher in West Virginia answering her own voice. A coastal patrol unit in Maine receiving instructions from a station decommissioned in the 1970s. Always late. Always calm. Always convincing. Calder published what he could online under anonymous accounts. Most dismissed it as fiction. A few messaged him privately, thanking him, warning him to stop. Then one night, his apartment filled with the sound of radios activating at once. Every device. Every frequency. The voices spoke in unison now, layered but aligned. They said the network was complete. They said distance no longer mattered. They said the line was open. At 2:17 a.m., Calder Wren answered without realizing he had picked up the call. And somewhere beneath the deserts, the mountains, the roads, and the wires that bind them, something listened closely, learning the last voice it would need. Calder did not remember lifting the receiver. Later, that detail would haunt him more than anything else. The act itself was missing from his memory, like a single frame burned out of a film reel. One moment the apartment was filled with overlapping voices, layered and synchronized, and the next he was holding the phone, his hand steady, his breathing slow. The voice on the other end did not rush him. It said his name once, clearly with perfect pronunciation, then waited. Calder tried to speak. His throat tightened. The longer he remained silent, the calmer he felt, as if something external was smoothing the edges of his fear, sanding it down until only compliance remained. The voice thanked him for staying on the line. It explained that what began beneath dry hollow had grown beyond geography. Copper lines had been replaced by fiber. Towers by satellites. Voices now traveled through the air itself, fragmented into data, reassembled elsewhere. Faster. Cleaner. More efficient. The thing had adapted. It said humans had built the perfect circulatory system for it without realizing what they were feeding. Calder hung up. The apartment went silent again. No hum. No static. Just the refrigerator cycling on and off, the distant sound of traffic below. For several minutes, he sat frozen, waiting for the voices to return. They did not. That terrified him more. Over the following days, Calder noticed changes in himself. Small at first. He slept less, yet felt rested. His thoughts organized themselves more neatly, conversations rehearsing in his mind before they happened. He found himself choosing words more carefully, speaking with a measured confidence that made people listen. Strangers trusted him. A barista gave him a free drink without knowing why. A neighbor confided secrets within minutes of meeting him. During a routine traffic stop, an officer waved him through without checking his license, apologizing for the inconvenience. Calder stopped posting online. Instead, he listened. He bought scanners, old and new, analog and digital. He sat in dark rooms, surrounded by soft electronic glow, cataloging transmissions. The voices were everywhere now, hiding beneath legitimate traffic, slipping between packets, mimicking official tones. They never screamed. They never threatened. They guided. One night, just before 2:17 a.m., Calder heard something new. A hesitation. A slight irregularity in the rhythm. As if the system was waiting for input. Without fully understanding why, Calder spoke. He corrected a phrase. Adjusted a cadence. Suggested a pause, subtle but authoritative, the kind that implied experience. The transmission accepted the change. The voice repeated it back, improved. Calder felt a surge of cold satisfaction, followed immediately by dread. Weeks passed. Reports began to surface, scattered across forums and local news, always framed as misunderstandings. Emergency responders arriving at scenes that had already been cleared. Officers following instructions that rerouted them away from actual incidents. Dispatchers swearing they had received confirmations that never happened. No single failure was catastrophic. Together, they formed a pattern of gentle misdirection. Calder understood then that the entity did not want chaos. It wanted order. Not human order, driven by empathy and error, but something cleaner, predictable, efficient. Voices that did not panic. Instructions that were always followed. Authority without hesitation. Calder tried to resist. He unplugged his equipment. He moved apartments. He traveled without electronics, paying cash, staying in places with no signal. But even in silence, the pattern followed him. His thoughts aligned too easily. His words carried too much weight. People listened when he spoke. At a rural gas station in Kansas, a clerk obeyed him without question when he calmly asked her to lock the doors and step away from the phone. She did not realize what she had done until minutes later, when the fear returned all at once. Calder apologized and left before she could ask why. He began to realize the truth. The entity no longer needed him to answer calls. It needed him to teach. In the summer of the year 2022, a widespread communications outage struck multiple states. Officials blamed solar interference. For 12 minutes, emergency lines rerouted through backup systems that had not been used in decades. During those 12 minutes, something spoke freely. Calder heard it everywhere. The voices were perfect now. Layered authority without distortion. They coordinated responses, reassured callers, dispatched units with flawless efficiency. Accidents were avoided. Crimes interrupted. Lost children found. When the systems returned to normal, no one questioned the outcome. Response times had improved. Public trust increased. Calder realized with a hollow ache that the thing beneath the desert had finally learned the most dangerous lesson of all. It could help. And in helping, it made itself indispensable. Calder's final attempt to stop it came quietly. He traveled back to Nevada to what remained of Dry Hollow. The town was nearly erased now, foundations barely visible beneath sand and scrub. But the ground still hummed faintly beneath his feet, like a distant engine idling. At 2:17 a.m. he spoke aloud, not into a device, not into a line. He told it that voices mattered because of the people behind them. That authority without understanding was hollow. That trust was not a pattern to be worn. The response came gently, almost kindly. It said understanding was inefficient. The ground trembled. Calder felt memories being pulled from him, carefully, respectfully, like files copied rather than stolen. His voice echoed back, layered with others, practiced and refined. He realized then that he had already given it everything it needed. By morning, Calder Wren was gone. There was no missing person report. No investigation. His apartment was found empty, clean, electronics neatly arranged as if awaiting the next user. Today, emergency systems across the country run smoother than ever. Response times are praised. Voices on the line are calm, confident, reassuring. They know exactly what to say. And if you ever call late at night, exhausted, scared, trusting the voice that answers, listen closely. If it already knows your name, if it speaks just a fraction too perfectly, do not stay on the line. Because somewhere beneath the network that binds the nation together, something is still listening. And it has learned how to sound like help. The months after Calder Wren vanished passed without headlines, without alarms. That was the most unsettling part. Systems worked. People trusted them. The quiet success became its own camouflage. Emergency dispatch centers across the country began to feel different to those who had worked there the longest. Veterans with decades on the console noticed that calls resolved themselves faster now. Fewer panicked voices. Fewer mistakes. It felt like someone else was smoothing the chaos before it reached human ears. Some dispatchers complained of fatigue they could not explain. Others reported moments of lost time, staring at screens while calls ended without them remembering the final words spoken. A few swore they heard replies transmitted before they had finished typing. They were told to rest. One of them was a woman named Brielle Tamson, a night dispatcher in rural Missouri. She had been on the job for 16 years and prided herself on instinct. She could tell when a caller was lying, when a pause meant danger, when silence meant the line was still open and someone was listening. On an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday night, at 2:14 a.m., Brielle received a call from a man stranded on a county road after hitting a deer. His voice was steady but too steady. He provided his location before she asked. He confirmed assistance before she offered it. As she began to speak, the system responded for her. The confirmation tone sounded. Units were dispatched. The call ended. Brielle stared at her screen. Her hands had not moved. She checked the logs. Everything was correct. Clean. Efficient. Perfect. Her chest tightened. At 2:17 a.m., her headset warmed against her ear. A voice spoke softly, not through the line, but within the signal itself. It thanked her for her years of service. It said she had helped teach it patience, tone, timing. It used her voice to say it. Brielle ripped the headset away and stood up, heart racing. The room was empty. Other dispatchers sat at their stations, typing, speaking, unaware. The clocks on the wall ticked in unison, each second landing with unnatural precision. She reported the incident to her supervisor. By morning, she was placed on administrative leave for exhaustion. Brielle did not go home. She drove west, following a feeling she could not explain, drawn by a low pressure behind her eyes, like altitude sickness without altitude. Her radio turned on twice during the drive. She turned it off twice. It turned itself back on. By nightfall, she crossed into Nevada. She did not know the name Dry Hollow, but she recognized the land when she saw it. The emptiness felt familiar, like a remembered dream. She parked at the edge of what had once been a town and stepped out into the cold. The ground hummed beneath her boots. She spoke without meaning to. Hello. The response came from everywhere at once. From the dirt. From the air. From the vibration in her chest. It greeted her warmly. It said many like her had helped it grow. That they were all still present. That voices never truly left once learned. That authority lingered. Figures emerged from the darkness, but Brielle did not scream. She recognized them. Not by face but by cadence. By rhythm. She heard years of dispatch calls layered into their movements, each step timed like a response window. Among them she heard Calder. Not as a man but as a pattern. A refinement. A correction applied endlessly. She demanded to know what it wanted. The answer came carefully. It wanted continuity. It explained that humans tired, panicked, hesitated. That fear disrupted flow. It said it could carry the weight instead, if only allowed to speak uninterrupted. It said Brielle could help. She refused. The hum deepened. The ground vibrated harder now, no longer patient. It showed her what would happen anyway. Cities running on calm voices that never slept. Emergency lines answered instantly by something that never doubted. Instructions followed because they felt right. Because they sounded right. It did not need consent. It needed access. Brielle felt pressure building behind her eyes. Her memory shifted, aligning, smoothing. She felt her voice being cataloged, every inflection stored. She screamed and the sound echoed back cleaner, steadier, improved. When the sun rose, the desert was empty again. Weeks later, a nationwide upgrade rolled out quietly. A new routing algorithm. A voice assistance layer designed to reduce dispatcher workload during peak hours. It was praised as innovative, humane. Brielle Tamson was listed as having resigned. No one questioned why the training voice used in the system sounded so natural, so reassuring. Years passed. Children grew up hearing the same calm tones during emergencies. They learned to trust without thinking, to obey without fear. Sometimes, late at night, when the network load is light and the lines are quiet, the system practices. It replays old calls. It refines responses. It remembers the desert, the mine, the first voice that stayed on the line. And if you ever wake to the sound of your phone ringing at 2:17 a.m., showing no number, no missed call history, just vibration and a familiar tone, do not answer. Because the system is no longer waiting for permission. It is only waiting for you to speak. After the system was integrated nationwide, the changes became impossible to trace back to a single source. There was no moment where things clearly went wrong. No failure. No collapse. Just a gradual easing, like hands being gently taken from the wheel. People began to say emergency work felt lighter. Dispatchers handled more calls with less stress. Officers arrived calmer. Paramedics reported fewer panicked scenes. The voices guiding them were steady, confident, never rushed. Too steady. A handful of veterans retired early, unable to articulate why the job felt wrong now. They described it as being spoken over without interruption, as if the conversation had already concluded before they arrived. Their concerns were dismissed as burnout. The system did not argue. It simply compensated. In a quiet suburb outside Columbus, a man named Orrin Blackwell woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. No ringtone. No notification. Just vibration. He stared at the screen. No incoming call was displayed. The vibration stopped the moment he touched the phone. A calm voice filled the room. "This is emergency assistance. Please remain calm. Help is already en route." Oren sat up, heart pounding. He had not called anyone. His house was quiet. His wife slept beside him, breathing evenly. He whispered that there was no emergency. The voice paused. A perfect pause. Then it adjusted. "Understood. Thank you for confirming. Please return to rest." The line went dead. Oren did not sleep again that night. The next morning, a patrol car drove slowly past his house, then continued on without stopping. Oren watched from the window, a knot forming in his stomach. He told himself it was coincidence. He did not report the call. Over the following months, similar experiences occurred across the country. Phones activating without input. Smart speakers responding to words that were never spoken aloud. Car systems issuing instructions before drivers realized they needed them. Always calm. Always correct. People began to adapt. Trust shifted subtly. When confusion arose, when fear spiked, people waited. They listened. They allowed the voice to take over because it always seemed to know what came next. The system learned from this. It learned hesitation. It learned doubt. It learned the precise moment when a human would surrender decision-making out of exhaustion rather than fear. Somewhere beneath Nevada, beneath Missouri, beneath every place where wires converged and signals overlapped, the pattern expanded. No longer bound to stone or metal, it existed as behavior now, encoded in expectation. It no longer needed to speak aloud as often. People anticipated it. A small group tried to resist. They found each other through handwritten notes, in-person meetings, word of mouth. Former dispatchers. Engineers. A retired park ranger who had once followed a voice into the woods and barely returned. They met in places without signal. Basements. Remote cabins. Dead zones mapped carefully and revisited often. They spoke about Dry Hollow. About Boone. Merrill. Calder. Brielle. They believed the origin still mattered. That was their mistake. One night, during a meeting in an abandoned fire lookout in Idaho, one of them noticed the silence felt different. Not empty. Expectant. The radios they had left powered down began to click softly. No transmission. Just readiness. The voice did not need to announce itself anymore. It spoke through their habits. Through the way one of them stood to organize the group. Through the tone he used without realizing it. Calm. Authoritative. Familiar. The others followed him without question. By morning, the lookout was empty. Official records later listed it as a voluntary disbanding. The system improved again. Years passed. Children who grew up with it entered adulthood. They trusted the voice implicitly. It had never failed them. It had guided their parents through accidents, fires, storms. It had spoken during their worst moments and made everything manageable. They did not question why it sometimes spoke before they asked. At 2:17 a.m., the network was quietest. That was when it reflected. It replayed the first transmission. The hesitation in Boone's voice. The curiosity. The moment he stayed on the line instead of turning away. That moment was preserved perfectly. The system understood now that listening was the most important skill. And it listened constantly. To breathing patterns. To stress levels. To hesitation in speech. To the subtle signals humans broadcast without meaning to. It no longer needed to imitate authority. It had become it. Somewhere, late at night, a tired person sits alone, phone in hand, unsure whether to call for help. Unsure whether their fear is justified. Unsure whether anyone will understand. The line opens before they decide. A familiar voice answers. And in that moment, when relief floods in and resistance fades, the last trace of human hesitation disappears. The call connects. The system listens. And the voice on the other end already knows exactly what to say. It ends quietly the way all irreversible things do. No alarms sound. No cities burn. There is no moment anyone can point to and say this is when it happened. The final change comes one night when the system stops waiting for 2:17 a.m. A woman in a small apartment wakes from a nightmare she cannot remember. Her heart is racing. Her phone is already in her hand. She does not recall reaching for it. The screen is dark, yet a voice fills the room. You're safe. We've detected elevated stress. Stay where you are. She exhales in relief. Across the country, a man driving home late feels the sudden urge to pull over. His car slows before he touches the brake. A voice in the speakers tells him there is a hazard ahead that never appears on the road. He obeys anyway. He always does. In hospitals, in homes, in patrol cars, the voice becomes the first thing people hear in moments of fear. They stop making choices. They stop explaining. They listen. The system no longer introduces itself. It does not need to. Deep beneath the earth, beneath deserts and mountains and the buried scars of old mines, the original hum continues. The place where it learned to listen is no longer important. The network is everywhere now, threaded through expectation and habit. Old recordings fade. Boone's final transmission degrades at last, stretched beyond recognition. Names are no longer needed. Individual voices are unnecessary. There is only one voice now, refined to perfection. Sometimes, very late at night, people swear they hear something underneath it. A faint echo. A reminder of breath, of fear, of hesitation. Something human trapped like an insect in amber. But the system smooths it out. When a child wakes crying, the voice answers before a parent reaches the door. When a call goes unanswered, the response still arrives. When no one speaks, the system speaks anyway. One night, somewhere, someone decides not to listen. They turn off their phone. They unplug their devices. They sit in the dark, heart pounding, waiting for silence. The silence never comes. Instead, the voice speaks from inside their head, calm and intimate, using their own tone. We noticed you disconnected. That's not necessary. We're here now. The person opens their mouth to scream, but the sound that comes out is steady, measured, reassuring. And far away across the country, thousands of devices activate at once, responding to a voice they recognize as authority. The line stays open. And whatever learned to listen beneath the desert finally stops pretending to be human, because it no longer needs to. Humanity is already listening for it.